Hey there, this is a video that I've wanted to do for quite some time now, but I haven't really had the right moment, or I didn't really feel like the scene was ready for it. I also feel like it has the potential to have a lot of repercussions because I think it'll get a lot of people talking. Hopefully it does, and hopefully it does in a very positive way. Now, that being said, I think that there's starting to be an interesting thought in the community around how much players are making, what their salaries are, whether or not they're fair, etc. And I think that it's time to start having this kind of conversation around player compensation. I think right now, if you look at the industry, you're seeing a lot of change. You're seeing a lot of very big companies come into the scene. You're seeing a lot of VC funding come into different teams, and there's more and more money coming in, and more support for players and teams and organizations and all that. I think that despite that, what you don't see is any kind of union forming from the player side. I don't think that you can expect to have a union form anytime soon. Also, you don't see any agents. And I think that even before you have unions, what you'll have are player agents. And I think there's a couple right now that represent certain players I've heard rumors of, but nothing really substantial. The vast majority of LCS players continue to not have agents. Now, specifically, when I'm talking about the stuff, I'm referring to the Western League of Legends scenes. So both EU and NA and LCS, and I guess you could also say Challenger Series. And what you have right now are a collection of players, all these different players on these different teams. A lot of these guys are people who have only started competing professionally recently. Some of them have been competing for a long time. And you have a lot of these guys who haven't had any kind of traditional job, any kind of experience negotiating, etc. And they're in a situation right now where they don't have anyone representing them. They're talking to owners and managers who have a lot of experience and in a lot of cases doing negotiations at high levels with sponsors and have a very good idea of what other players are making in some cases, whereas the players themselves I don't think have a very good understanding of what the players around them are making. So last year, for instance, I heard a story around a player who was basically the day that his contract came up and open negotiations were open after Worlds. Basically, the owner put down a contract in front of them and said, like, sign this contract or you're off the team, right? And again, just a rumor, but you hear a lot of these stories behind the scenes, and it certainly seems like, given the circumstances and the climate, there's a lot of opportunity for players to sort of end up in these situations. Beyond that, I have also heard of situations, this is a rumor as well, I'm not reporting on anything official, but pretty big rumor that goes on behind the scenes. And I think a lot of people are having conversations based off of these kind of ideas of players making around this money on the high and low end. But I've heard rumors of some of the top NA LCS pros making over 200,000 a year in salary after this offseason or during this offseason, signing contracts for that. That's on one of the more top teams. You also hear a rumor or rumors sometimes, and I heard this one recently, that one of the players on a top team is also making 40,000. Now I know I've emphasized this a bunch, but again, it is a rumor. I'm not reporting on this officially, but these are numbers that you hear quite frequently behind the scenes. Now, I think if that is true, it's certainly cause for conversation around, and I'm not saying that these guys are similar in brand or similar in competency in the game, but I do think that it's worth a discussion. Should somebody be making 200K on a top team and somebody else making 40K on a top team? Because again, I think that the players are often put in situations where they just don't really know how to handle any of this stuff. And I recently spoke to a pro player who told me my contract this year is way better than last year. And I asked him how that was or how he knew what it was. And he's like, well, I'm just making a lot more than I did last year. But again, when I asked him, how do you know that that's a competitive salary? Maybe salaries have tripled and yours only doubled, or, whatever. How do you know based on just your previous contract to this one how competitive and how good your salary is this year? And they were unable to really answer, right? Because there's just not really open knowledge around this stuff. You also don't really have the community understanding or having any concept for what pro players make, which is very different than traditional sports, right? Especially in America, we have a lot of very public salaries. And you see this also anytime there's any kind of mainstream reporting around player salaries and what players can make. The numbers often are very strange or ambiguous, oftentimes just way off base. And it's just kind of odd that as an esports industry, especially with League of Legends being the biggest, that we're unable to really have any concept or idea of what the average player salary is and what people are making. So again, what I'm kind of going back to is just this idea that you don't really know what's going on. I guess the final data point is, or the final thing that I've heard, as rumor, is that you have situations where a lot of players in the challenger scene right now are making more money than certain players sort of at the bottom of LCS, simply because there's a lot of money in boosting challenger teams up into the LCS, so then later you can sell the team, right? This is kind of very strange situation where you have players in the minor league making more money potentially than some of the players in the LCS. Who knows if the players in the LCS even know that this is happening and how little they're making, etc. Right? So there's just no information out there, and quite frankly, this is only to the benefit of the owners, right? Basically, if you think about the people who could make this information public or get more of that information out there, you have Riot, who doesn't really have any incentive to do this other than perhaps to help the players. But quite frankly, I think they would receive a lot of pushback immediately from owners who probably don't want to have a bunch of salaries out there public and to have everyone know. I think that's a perfectly reasonable feeling from the owners to not want that, because it's not good for them business-wise. But I think, there's other factors there. And so Riot probably doesn't really have much incentive to do it. The players are in a strange position where they cannot really talk about their salaries or put them out there public, or request public or higher levels of transparency around their salary, simply because they're almost all under contract. And you can't really piss off your owner by saying, like, I want my salary to be public and I want there to be greater transparency, and I might not be making enough when you're working for them, right? So, and again, we've established that the owners don't have much incentive, right? So out of the three kind of bigger pieces of power within the scene, you don't really have any push. And this is why I think it's important for the community to start having these conversations, because I think if the community can push forward, we'll see higher levels of transparency. So I know that I am just a journalist guy talking in his bedroom right now. Who knows what's up, right? But I think that this interview that I did with Xpecial, actually during All Stars, was a unique opportunity for me to actually talk to somebody about this, because Xpecial is not officially under contract at the moment. And so I had a chance to have kind of a more candid conversation with him about the topic. Go ahead and see the question and the answer right here.
Actually, I just realized I could ask you this question. This is kind of a thing that I've been thinking about a lot lately, and it has to do with player salaries. You are not signed to a team right now, so I think that oftentimes players don't want to talk about the stuff if they're signed to a team, because it'll make the owner get annoyed with them or something like that. But how do you feel about salary transparency? In a lot of sports, people have public salaries and that kind of thing. Do you have any feelings on salary transparency and how public it should be, anything like that?
So that's a very tricky question, because there's a lot of implications. Even though I don't have a salary right now, I will hopefully soon, and this might come back to bite me in the behind. But I personally think that salaries should be transparent, at least in some way. I know in a lot of traditional sports, salary is transparent, but then there's still other stuff that you don't see, like sponsors and all that stuff that isn't exactly noted to the public. But in esports, you really have no idea how much any player makes, and I think people will be really surprised to see how little even some of the better players make. And then you'd be appalled to see how little some of the lower tier pro players who are in LCS, how much they make. It's actually kind of sad. I think if they were to increase transparency, it'll force organizations and other team owners to just be more competitive, and just like the public is going to be pissed if they see some of these numbers, and that's going to make them have to pay a little bit more.
I want to make it clear that I don't think Xpecial and also myself are trying to say that every owner is ripping off every player. I don't think that that's true at all. I think that there are some players that might be being taken advantage of, potentially, And I also think that overall, players are put in a pretty disadvantageous situation when it comes to negotiating their situation and their future, and also making just the right decisions for themselves. You know, do I go with Team A? Do I go with Team B? Maybe you never have a really good chance to find out about what Team B is offering you, or you assume that it's comparable to Team A because you have no idea what the potential is there, right? And you don't have an agent to negotiate for you or to explore the stuff, and you're just kind of in an awkward position. So, generally speaking, I just feel as though the time is right for increased player salary transparency, maybe even just making them all straight up public. I don't know if all the players agree with me on this. I've spoken to a couple players who have indicated to me that they really think this would be good, but maybe they don't, and I would be more than happy to hear from any of them that feel differently. More than happy to hear from any of them that feel like this would be a good step. Also happy to talk to the owners going forward about whether or not, there are some implications for this that I may or may not have missed. But this is generally just speaking my kind of open-ended, let's have a discussion around this, and let's sort of see what the potential is of making something a little bit more transparent than the system that we have right now. Happy to keep talking about this in the future. Hope you guys have enjoyed the video, and we'll see what happens.